Major Spoilers podcast covers news, reviews, and of course, spoilers, and goes into details about the topics discussed. So if you haven't read, listened, or watched the items we talk about, you might want to come back later.
This week on the Major Spoilers podcast, or should I say Major Spoilers Superhero podcast, we're getting into trademark law. When we think of the word superhero, I think a lot of us think about somebody in spandex and somebody in a cape and tights going around doing good deeds. But who owns the word superhero? Or is it something that can be owned by any one group or people? We're going to talk about it this week on the Major Spoilers podcast. And joining us, somebody who hasn't been on the show in forever, Dr. Peter Coogan. Welcome back, Pete.
Welcome back, Steve. Yeah, I don't know exactly what happened to us, but I want to be back on again, and I always enjoyed being on Major Spoilers.
Well, we are happy to have you here because we've got a fascinating story. Certainly, other people have looked at this over the news outlets over the last couple of days, but bringing in people who are actual sources of this story, I think, are rather important. But Pete, let's first talk about the word superhero. Where does it come from? Is it a genre? Is it a designation? Is it? I guess when we get into talking about who owns this and we talk about trademarks, we need to talk about things like, do we need to say tissue, or do we need to say Kleenex, or do we need to say aspirin, or do we need to say Bear aspirin, all those kinds of things. So what is a superhero? How do we define that?
Well, do you want to talk about where it comes, the word comes from?
Yeah. Let's talk about where the word comes from.
So in my book, Superhero, Secret Origin of Genre, which is out in a new printing of it.
Oh, excellent.
Amazon. Yeah. Anyway, I traced it back to 1912 based upon Peter Sattler, a scholar. He went into the ProQuest database and did a search, and he traced it back to 1912. The real hero of the book is Peter Davenant. Peter is in fact, a sort of superhero, a trans-leading man, a cyclops of unselfishness, a dreadnought of duty. And that's with a hyphen. And he gives several other examples, and in all of them, it means a hero who is super, right? A superior hero. It's used for talk about the prodigious feats of Paul Bunyan. It's used to talk about the film cowboy Bill Hart. It wasn't thought of as a separate term, but, and this is something I just discovered because I was looking around when I saw news about the trademark strike. I was looking around and it was right there where you would expect it in English to come about in Nietzsche. And so
yes, the Superman.
Yeah, well, no, wait, superhero also. So was Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra was first translated into English in 1896. And Alexander Till, the translator, translated Übermensch as beyond man, right? Rather than Superman.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's the Thomas Kuhn version from 1909 where the term Superman came from. But what's interesting is that in chapter 35, the Sublime Ones, at the end of the chapter, it says, "For this is the secret of the soul. When the hero hath abandoned it, then only approacheth it in dreams. The superhero. Thus spake Zarathustra." And Till translated that as the beyond hero. But it was right there in Nietzsche the whole time. Now, weirdly, this is not the first use of the word superhero in English, except it is. So as a noun, it is. But if you look back in newspapers, there's going back, I think it's in the 1880s, someone refers to something as superheroic. So superhero actually first entered English as an adjective, as far as I can tell, and then became a noun because of Nietzsche. It's translation.
I think I think that's fascinating, and maybe we'll bring this up again here in just a moment. But people talk about image manipulation, and they say, "Hey, I'm going to go Photoshop this thing." The word is a verb, and really, Photoshop is a noun, a proper noun, actually. And Adobe hates that people say, "I'm Photoshopping this," or "I'm going to go Photoshop this" as a verb, and then because it potentially causes problems for them legally. We move forward, and suddenly Superman pops up on the scene. And everyone just assumes that, hey, here's a superhero comic. It's a whole new genre of itself. Is that the next step in this process?
Superman, entered the English language. There's the play by George Bernard Shaw. It's used by Jack London. It's used by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's used in all over the place. There's a Cagney movie where he's referred to as, the character says, "I'm not a Superman." So all that was very common. Obviously, Siegel and Schuster picked up the word Superman and made it this character. After that, what was that character called? Well, very quickly, it got recognized as a genre type. And so the example that I give in my book is Albert Sundell in Crash the Comics has a reference to it's in an article. It's for how you crash the comics, how you make it into the comics, right?
Okay.
And he's got a whole bunch of advice. And so he refers to superheroes: Batman, Captain America, the Flag, Samson, Magno and Davy, the Wizard and Roy the Superboy. So by 1942, the genre was established. And the fact that he was using this to tell people how to crash the comics indicates that it was understood there's three players in genre. There's the producers who own the properties, the creators who make them, and the audiences who consume them.
Right.
And when genres work, all three of them agree on what the thing is called, what it means, how it works, the rules, the conventions, what's supposed to be in there. And so Abner Sundell in 1942 believed that everybody knew what the word superhero was. And he only uses it for characters that would fit pretty carefully, pretty closely to my definition and to our general understanding of the word superhero. So 1942, it's definitely established.
So would we say then at this point in 1942, as you've laid out for us, that superhero is a fairly generic term for a genre or a series of tales featuring specific characters?
Because Abner Sundell uses it to mean anybody's character. Batman, Captain America, right? You've got National, Timely, the Flag, Samson, Magno, Davy, not connected to those companies.
Right.
And the reason we know that it exists as a genre is because of Red Tornado, who in 1940 appears. And she's a parody of superheroes, although she's that type of character in the story is referred to as Mystery Man. But she has the mission. She's trying to protect her kids, protect the neighborhood from these gangsters. She has the powers, sort of. She's got a pot on her head, which prevents her from, getting hit. The powers is sort of a parody. And she's got an identity. She's got a code name and a costume. Right? So by 1940, we know the genre exists because it can be parodied. Parody only works when the audience knows what is being made fun of. If you've ever seen a parody in a genre that you don't watch, you have no idea what's going on. But if you're watching a soap opera, for example, and some young actor, some kid disappears, an 11-year-old disappears, in 3 or 4 weeks they're going to come back and be 17 years old, 18 years old.
Yeah.
And if you don't know the genre, you would think, wait, what? What just happened? But
I think the same thing also helps transcend language, right? Because you can watch a telenovela and you can understand what's going on even if you don't speak the language because of the tropes and expectations set up in a soap opera.
Absolutely. And so genres, while they in some sense are national and medium specific, they can leap over and become international. The Western, think about spaghetti Westerns where everybody spoke a different language,
Mm-hmm.
and it still did Spain,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the West. It's the American West. Exactly.
So, and this is where things get really weird, because my understanding, again, as we look at who owns the word superhero, is that generic terms like this can't be copyrighted and they can't be trademarked. Some, classic examples of my understanding is Paris Hilton tried to trademark "That's Hot," and that was struck down. Donald Trump tried to trademark "You're Fired," and that was struck down. And so I guess it's really confusing to me how we end up with the word superhero even being allowed to be trademarked. And I think to kind of answer that, we need to bring in Adam Adler, who is a trial attorney. He works for Reichman, Jorgensen, Lehman, and Feldberg in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So you're a trial attorney that works with intellectual property, and you are involved in this superhero trademark strike. I guess the question is, what I just asked is, how can a generic term like superhero even be allowed to be trademarked, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so it's interesting because the superheroes trademark has origins dating back to the late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, as we just heard from Peter, superhero was already the name of a genre.
Yeah.
And so at that point, it probably shouldn't have been registered as a trademark. Like at that point, it was probably generic. If you ask, well, like how could it happen? The answer is that the term as originally used, well, there are two explanations. The first one is, as originally used, the term was registered in connection with costumes.
Right.
And the way trademark law works is even if marks are identical, they're like the same mark, same word, same phrase, same logo,
Mm-hmm.
they're treated differently depending on the category of goods that are covered.
Okay.
And so superheroes for comics could mean something different than superheroes for costumes.
I see.
And so, it's possible that an examiner looking at how superheroes is used back in 1960s would say, okay, I don't know if this actually happened, but they could say superheroes is used in comics, but nobody has large scale mass made superhero costumes.
Yeah. So
even that is somewhat suspect, because by that point in time, they probably were using it for costumes.
Well,
right?
and that's the thing that I find really interesting, because from my research, we look at Ben Cooper in 1967, who had the classic Ben Cooper Halloween costumes. For those of you who are of a certain age, you may remember those plastic masks that you would wear on your face with the rubber band and like a plastic costume that would go over that. Ben Cooper is the one who registered this trademark for superhero costumes, and specifically selling Batman, Superman, Captain America, Halloween costumes. And so, again, I understand where you're coming from, Adam, by saying, somebody looked at this and said, well, superhero as a genre in comic books is not the same as superhero here in costuming, but you're also selling the same costumes that are derivative or from the comic books.
Well, exactly. And in trademark law, that's a concept of are the goods related, right? So Apple can sell computers and Apple can sell software.
Mm-hmm.
And so their mark in computers can stop someone from registering the same mark for software because they're related goods. And if you're a consumer and you see a mark in one field, would you assume or come to think, would it be your impression that same mark was produced by the person from the other field?
I mean, that is a good question, right? I mean, we've got Apple computers and we have the Apple Music company from the Beatles, right?
Yep. Exactly.
And so one could assume that these are two separate things because music, the Beatles are definitely different from Steve Jobs. But at the same time, there might be somebody out there, especially maybe some younger people, that are like, wait, Apple made the Beatles music, and be confused in that.
Well, right. And that's where you get a problem with these major mega corporations like Amazon.com and Walmart, and even DC, who basically sell everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so if they basically sell everything, then DC would say, It doesn't matter if you're selling alcohol or baby powder or pick your category of goods, because we sell everything. If you use our mark, and this is an actual example, on a bike lock, people are going to think that you're associated with us. And that's referring to a successful challenge from DC on kryptonite bike locks.
Interesting.
And of course, this wasn't really on the examiner's mind in 1967, the 1960s, when they were reviewing this application. They probably did a search through trademark records, found no marks for superheroes or anything that would be confusingly similar, and then stamped it.
Wow. I mean, yes, the laws have changed and things have gotten more complicated, but to be thinking that it was just somebody that said, yep, superhero costumes, here we go, and suddenly it's superheroes with a plural, correct?
Superheroes with a plural.
Okay.
Actually, the first one was superhero singular.
Okay. All right.
Actually.
Okay.
But in trademark law, the general rule is there's not much of a distinction between singular and plural.
Okay.
Hyphenated or not hyphenated, minor spelling differences, or even single word and compound word.
Because that's going to be an answer to my question later on. So it's important for people to understand that part right there. So this is owned by Ben Cooper Costumes. They do their own thing. This is not, I mean, certainly they're probably licensing the likenesses of Superman, Batman, etc. The Hulk. That was a costume that I had as a kid. Then the Mego toy company comes in with the line of action figures, and they have the world's greatest superheroes line that they're releasing in 72, and they want to trademark that. And that's where we run into this kind of first, I guess, dust up of who owns the word superheroes.
Yeah, that's right. So Ben Cooper has trademark over superhero. It's registered. And that means that if somebody else wants to register another mark that's the same or similar, it's going to be blocked by the trademark office.
Yeah.
Because they run a search through all the registered trademarks and it'll pop up. And so when world's greatest superheroes and Mego, I think you pronounce it Mego? How did you pronounce it?
I don't know. I don't know which way you're supposed to pronounce it. I say Mego, but
I've always pronounced it Mego. When Mego tried to register their mark, Cooper opposed. And then at the same time, as part of that proceeding, Mego then filed a challenge to Cooper's trademarks. And so they were embroiled in this ongoing contested dispute over trademark rights.
Now, I mean, 1972, are we talking multi-million-dollar lawsuit, or is this, adjusted for inflation, or is this something that is just kind of more of an inconvenience than anything?
I got to say, I have no idea what the legal fees were back in the time, but trademark proceedings and trademark contests, they are litigation. They are contentious. And it's very easy for companies just to not want to have to deal with that. So it's certainly an inconvenience for most companies, all but the largest companies. And even then, they're going to be inconvenienced.
Okay, so from your legal expertise, because you're a lawyer, I'm not. If you are approached in this, if you had to look at this from an outside, Ben Cooper versus Mego or Mego, how would you just kind of approach this? Or would you say, oh, wait a minute, this should never have happened in the first place? And the trademark should have been struck then? Or is this like, well, toys are different than costumes, so therefore they're two different things, just like you said a moment ago. How would you approach this?
I mean, I think it goes back to what we were saying before, which is even in 1967, this is a generic term. And so that means superhero shouldn't have been granted, certainly shouldn't withstand challenge. I don't think they asserted genericness as a ground of challenge because that would hit their own mark too.
Okay.
But I think it shouldn't have been granted, and that would be the outcome here. You get a little bit more ground with Mego's world's greatest superheroes because you're adding world's greatest on top of it, and taking a generic term and then adding something on top that makes it distinctive and stand out and unique can change a generic mark and transform it into something that could otherwise be distinctive.
Okay, I see. So
if they had done that in the market, and I don't know if they had done that in the market, if they'd used it in such a way so that it would be deemed distinctive, or if it could be approved just on its own.
This is where it gets weird, though, because somehow both Marvel and DC ended up with ownership of the word superheroes.
Right. So what happened is, like I said, it's pretty inconvenient and pretty annoying to have to deal with these contested oppositions.
Yeah.
Oppositions and cancellation proceedings and interferences in the trademark office. And for whatever reason, it might have been because of that inconvenience. It might have been because they had other business problems that were going on, both companies.
Yeah.
But Cooper called it quits and assigned his interest. I forget which one called it quits first. But in short succession, both companies decided they didn't want to have to deal with this. And so both companies signed their interest in the mark over jointly to DC and Marvel.
Which my understanding is that's something that the trademark office also doesn't generally do, is assign joint ownership of a trademark.
Well, and this is different, right? This is not the trademark office assigning joint ownership.
Okay.
This is the owners of the mark, the owners of the registered mark, assigning, basically selling and transferring their interest in the trademark over to two companies jointly.
Is there any record, or is there any stuff that either of Peter or you, Adam, know why they decided to hand it over to specifically Marvel and DC? I know those are the biggest companies that are making, in quotes, superhero comics as a genre. Because it seems like they should have either just said, fine, I'm giving up my trademark, or it's for anybody that's publishing superhero comics.
So I don't know the details of who was paid and how much they were paid to take over the rights. I know that Mego assigned their interest in the mark over to DC and Marvel first, and that caused Cooper to basically face two large comic companies, or their stand-ins at the time, two large comic companies in their protracted trademark litigation. And so that's the point where they kind of folded. For context as to like why they would sell to DC or Marvel, it could be money. It could be that they just didn't want to have to deal with fighting it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I know on Marvel and DC's side that at that point, and maybe even still today, though I don't know for sure, those companies were earning more from their licensed products, like costumes and toys, than they were from the comic books themselves.
Right.
And so it was immensely important to Marvel and DC, as I see it, to get that sort of merchandising locked down and to have the maximum amount of rights that they could get as possible, which is why they would be interested in acquiring those marks.
Right.
And, there's a little bit of a deeper story as to how we end up with joint ownership. And the answer, and you could tell this from kind of like the contested trademark record, is they were able to tell pretty early on that if they fought each other, nobody would get the mark.
Right.
Right. Marvel can't get a mark over it because DC uses the term and people don't associate it exclusively with Marvel. DC can't get the mark on it because it's the other way around.
So, my understanding is that the reason why we have the Legion of Super-Heroes is because of this trademark issue, right? Where one person owns, or like Marvel owns superheroes as two words, and DC has to use the hyphen. Was there does anybody know on the agreement of that? Because that is the rumor that I had heard, was that they had agreed to, one of you can use superheroes as two words, one of you has to use the hyphen.
I haven't seen anything like that.
Okay. Pete, do you know?
I don't know anything about that one. No.
Okay. All right.
But what I do know is if you look in the trademark records, you'll see that the patent office, when you patent and trademark office, it's like I said before, when you file a mark that is the same as or confusingly similar to another registered mark, the trademark office will block your application.
Okay.
And so for DC and Marvel, many times over the years, one of them will try to register by themselves for a mark that contains the word superheroes, such as Legion of Superheroes or DC Superhero Girls. And when that happens, the examiner flags it and they say, you can't register this because there's another mark for superheroes that's going to block it. And so when that happens, the other company writes in and they say, we own this mark. along with the other company, and we can confirm that there's no likelihood of confusion and we consent to this registration.
Okay.
And so that's how it happens. And they did that in the case of Legion of Superheroes.
All right.
So it
So
was express consent.
yeah. So 1972, let's say up until last week, or a year or so ago, the trademark for superheroes owned jointly by DC and Marvel. My understanding is that when you have something that is trademarked, one of the things in order for you to keep that trademark is that you have to defend that trademark. Not just when something comes into the trademark and patent office and you say, okay, yes, you can use super-heroes, but you have to defend it so that it doesn't become a generic term. I guess in this case, again, I mentioned before, Kleenex is one of those that was trademarked at one point and lost it. Aspirin, the same thing. Is that the case, or am I off the mark there?
That is part of the story. So there's not a separate trademark test for do you enforce it. Instead, the test is always, is this mark something that consumers will recognize as a single source identifier? So are you going to see the McDonald's arches and think, oh, I know what company puts that out. I know that comes from a single source.
Okay.
Same thing with Coca-Cola. And if you don't police your mark, right? If you don't challenge other people's infringement of your territory, then it ends up having the effect of it starts to take on a life of its own and starts to mean something else.
Okay.
But it's not like, oh, you didn't enforce it, therefore it's not your mark anymore. It's more like, if you don't enforce it, then it will lose its meaning and then you won't own it anymore.
Okay, got it.
Likewise, you can enforce the mark as much as you want, but if people still come to associate it with not your company and with a category for a genre, then you're still going to lose the mark.
And that seems to be both a blessing and a curse, right? So DC and Marvel are sitting there and just going to pretend that they all have big mustaches and that they're twirling them nonstop. We are protected from now into the future. But at the same time, there are more comic book publishers that are producing superhero genre comics. This also seems like it's very bad for an industry.
It's terrible for the industry, because what it does is it basically has the two biggest players at the top trying to constrain the promotional space for their competitors, and even worse, for small competitors who don't pose a meaningful threat to them in the first place.
Right. Let me ask a quick diversion. Maybe you're familiar with this or not. San Diego Comic-Con or Comic-Con International suing over the word Comic-Con from a few years ago.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that case?
I am familiar with the case, though not with all the intricate details.
Okay. Are we talking about the same thing here?
It is a similar kind of thing.
Okay.
This case is unique in that it has the joint ownership issue. And one of the arguments we make in the petition is put aside the generic question, put it in its own little box. There's a separate basis to challenge these marks. And that is you can't have two competitors who own a single mark. You can't have a mark that's a single source identifier if it identifies two sources.
Yeah, because that by itself is not a single source identifier. So
because then it's not a trademark. So that dimension of it is not in the Comic-Con case, but just non-trivial argument that people do not associate Comic-Con exclusively with San Diego Comic-Con.
Correct.
Absolutely.
So do you have any instances of comic book companies, publishers, titles that have been struck down because they wanted to use the word superhero either in a title or somewhere in the marketing of their material?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful with struck down. But there have certainly been instances where DC or DC in conjunction with Marvel have challenged small creators' efforts to promote their work. And there was a really good Bleeding Cool article that came out a few days ago.
Yep.
And then one that came out a few weeks ago too, as part of the proceedings, where they basically give you a long list of the people who have been challenged by DC and Marvel. Some of the examples are like Reynaldo T. Felix. We cite him in the petition, the cancellation petition.
Okay.
For A World Without Superheroes.
Okay.
Right. There's another one that is from Business Zero to Superhero that got flagged. So there are a lot a lot of people who attempted to register their mark, and even people who tried to use their mark and had interference from DC in their efforts, or DC and Marvel in their efforts to promote it.
Now, Pete, you've never gotten any flack from DC or Marvel for, I mean, certainly titles can't be copyrighted, they can't be trademarked, but did you ever get any flack for using superheroes in any of the books that you've worked on?
Actually, I did. So in my book, Superhero, The Secret Origin of a Genre, came out in 2006, published by Monkey Brain Books.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I was looking around to get image clearance. Now, I have a bunch of images in my book, and I wanted to do fair use because it is fair use. And
academic text.
But I contacted Marvel and DC about it. And at DC, the attorney there, I think it was David Gregory, said, do it. Just do it. It is fair use. But if you ask us about it, if you ask me to clear it, then I have to do work and I have to charge. He says, I'm really sick of publishers not just realizing the law. And most of the time it's because the publisher's insurance carrier doesn't want to risk getting sued. Well, so he told me to just do it. So I was like, great. And he says also, we don't really care that much about scholarly work. It's not a problem. At Marvel, I did get a letter that asked me for $500 to use Superhero in a comic-related publication. So I wrote back and I said, my book is not a comic-related publication.
Yeah.
And then through a side door, I got into Joe Quesada, who I argued to him, hey, I'm going to use, DC is, fine with the public fair use, right? Fair use.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm just going to use theirs. And I think my book, will make a difference, be out there. People will see it. And that's kind of worked out. And they'll associate, even though the discussion is balanced pretty evenly between Marvel and DC, they'll only see DC images. And then, so they let me go ahead with the fair use claim. Although that's only a defense. If they had sued over it,
right.
It had to go to court. But so that was, I am one of those small, although my publisher is Monkey Brain, one of those small people who Marvel tried to quash or tried to extort $500 from. I mean, come on.
I laugh. Yeah, I laugh at that story because I've had those similar, off the record, here's what we're going to do. But, if something becomes a problem, then we have to do this. I've had those same conversations at publishers where they're like, yeah, you can do this. We're fine with it. But if somebody complains, then we have to take legal action. So I think that's rather funny, which brings us to this idea of super babies. What's going on with this? So my understanding is this is a comic out of London, indie publisher, and they want to trademark their comic Super Babies. Nowhere in that, besides the word super, do I see the word superhero, single word, super hyphen heroes, any of that stuff. Is it just because of the word super?
That's exactly right. It's because of the word super. So this whole thing started when my client, Super Babies Limited, and the author of the Super Babies comic, S.J. Richard, he started writing his book. He wanted to create a fun comic book for children that would also be like a hybrid comic book picture book about a team of superpowered superhero super babies. And so he wrote the comic, applied to register his mark, and DC opposes. And DC filed an opposition. They say, we have the exclusive right to use the word super as a prefix.
Wow.
Right? And Peter can talk about it. The superhero genre has certain tropes. It has certain conventions. And one of those conventions that's widely associated with the genre and not any particular company is the word super. And we all know about this. We see Kirkman's Super Dinosaur, Super Zombie.
Yeah.
There are even other independent publications with trademarks, Super Rabbi, Super Seek, Super Little Kitties, and the list goes on, right?
Yeah.
And so we see this opposition proceeding coming from DC, and we say, wait a second. You say you've got the exclusive right to use the word super, yet your largest competitor, by your permission and express consent, uses and claims the exclusive right to use the word superhero? How can DC have exclusive right to super when Marvel is using superhero?
Right.
And that's what led to the cancellation. That's how we started this whole thing, because, we can't promote our comic. We're being threatened by promoting our comic as a superhero story and by using the word super, by the existence of this registration and by DC's ongoing opposition.
That just surprises me. Peter, did you want to add anything more onto the use of the word super?
I mean, in many ways, it doesn't make any sense, because that would be like Marvel claiming it had the use of Spider because of Spider-Man.
Right.
And especially with DC and Super Baby, if you Google it, everybody Google it, you're going to get Dragon Ball because of Super Baby, the character.
Oh,
there's
okay.
superbaby.tv, which is a thing for preschoolers. There's actually Super Baby, 12 ways to give your child a head start. And there are other things that look kind of like comic books, but they're kids' books. I see at least 3 separate flying Super Babies, right? So it's out there and being used currently by lots of people. So it's not that Super Baby is not unique, but the idea that super can be, owned as a trademark, as a prefix. Do they own Wonder? Do they own Ultra? We've got Wonder Woman. We've got Ultra Boy.
Yeah.
How far does that extend to linguistically, right? To have an adjective like that. And are they claiming to own Wonder and to own Ultra? Well, no. We have Wonder Man, right? There's any number of Ultras. So even just logically, it doesn't make sense with their own behavior. And it makes no linguistic sense.
Yeah. So Adam, you filed this trademark strike with the government, like you do. My understanding is that DC and Marvel didn't show up.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the interesting thing, and it's really ironic, right? Because all the examples that I mentioned before of people who have been blocked by DC when they're trying to register superhero related marks, usually as part of a bigger phrase, DC doesn't go after the big companies, right? They don't go after Robert Kirkman's use of the best superhero comic in the world on top of Invincible.
Mm-hmm.
They don't go after, Mark Millar's Ambassadors, which he promoted in the solicitation as a superhero comic.
Yeah.
They only go after little companies who would be intimidated by them or don't have the resources or sophistication to mount an objection. And when they file this thing, the response that they get in the trademark office is nothing.
Huh.
The counterparties, the smaller companies whose efforts are being challenged, they typically almost always just take a default.
Yeah.
They don't respond. They don't know how to respond, or they don't have the money to find an attorney who would take it on. And so they default. And so that's what's so interesting about this is, we've got the Super Babies Limited, very small company, right? Who gets challenged. And then they, for the first time, say, you know what? No, you can't stop us and block us from doing this on the basis of a generic term that is not a trademark. And the second they do, Marvel and DC, they're the ones now taking a default judgment. It's wild.
That's the part that's really confusing about me because, with this judgment, this reversal, they lose control of the word superhero in all its forms. That just seems massively, I don't want to say incompetent, but it just seems like somebody wasn't paying attention.
No, it was, I'm confident. I'm not over there. I haven't talked with them about it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But, they have an attorney who's sophisticated. He's represented them for a long time.
Right.
This was not, I do not get the impression that this was accidental.
Interesting. Because that does bring up something else that maybe both of you can comment on or whatever. This is opinion. I was 100% in 2019. I was like, hey, listen, Mickey Mouse is going to go into the public domain in 2024. I was telling students, be on the lookout because you're going to see Disney start amping up discussions about extending copyright extension again so that they can protect Mickey Mouse. And then nothing. 2024 rolls around and they're like, yeah, we've got Mickey Mouse protected under copyright and trademark in other forms in his newest incarnation. So we're just going to let this lapse. It seems like the same thing is kind of here with DC and Marvel. It's like the headache of dealing with this and the bad will that we are going to generate from this is more than just letting it go, just giving it up.
Yeah, I think so. They could have challenged it. I mean, they could have responded to the petition, but they wouldn't have won. The deck was stacked so much against them, and you can I infer that they probably knew this, and that's why you see their prosecution pattern, where they only go after the small companies, because if they ever were to go after a big company, it wouldn't survive.
Yeah. Right.
And so.
So again, this is kind of like the example of the Ben Cooper and the Mego toy company, right? It's like, this is such a headache for both of us. Let's just assign it to Marvel and DC. But in this case, it's just like, let's just give it up.
That's right. I think that's what's happened, and it's hard to know for sure. But that certainly is consistent with the pattern that we see of how they prosecute it and how they use it.
How quickly did this decision happen? I mean, when did you file the petition, and when was it finally resolved?
So I filed the petition in May, and the cancellation came down last Thursday.
That's a pretty quick turnaround.
It is, but the only event that happened in between then was DC entering an appearance and asking for an extension of time to respond, then not responding, and then I filed, it's called a motion for default judgment, which is what you do when somebody doesn't respond. Okay. And then they had some number of days to respond to that, and they didn't. And then after that, the board rules on the motion.
Wow. So this is this seems like a bigger case than what people are aware of at the moment.
I certainly think it has significant implications, but the way that I've seen people talking about it, and the way I've seen it reflected in the media, shows that people are evaluating it in the right way. And, recognizing that this is an upset, this is a sea change.
Mm-hmm.
And you can think, especially if you're a big fan of comics and especially independent comics, you see in these independent productions, people refer to superheroes not as superheroes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Some people ignored it and just tried to do it anyway. But other people, you'd see supes, you'd see capes. Sometimes you'd see supers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Metahumans, next generation humans, all kinds of different ways of referring to superheroes. And now that kind of equivocation isn't going to be necessary.
So I can now call the Major Spoilers podcast the greatest superhero podcast of them all, and I don't have to worry about somebody coming in and trying to nail me on that. That's right.
Well, and beyond that, so like that's a big win, and we're really happy about that, and that's why we did what we did. But it also, in the same way that the superheroes in the comics themselves tell us to stand up to bullies and stand up to villains, this echoes that narrative in real life. And so, and my hope is that people will see this and say, no, you've got a big corporation on the other side, but if you're right, and it's something that's important to you, you can still succeed.
Very cool. What a great way to end that conversation. Adam Adler, thank you so much for coming in and talking about the case. And Pete, thank you for coming in and talking about the origin of superhero and kind of setting us up for this. Really, I think our listeners are going to find this super informative. See what I did there? Pete, where can people find more from you? And tell us again where about the new release of the book.
Yeah, so my book is out. It's a POD. You can get a hard copy of it. Amazon's the easiest place to do that. And I'm not sort of super available on I'm not just on my own social media. But the easiest place to do that, like I said, is through Amazon. It's available $20 in hard copy and $10 in Kindle. And I'm so happy to have it out again because I just want my ideas out there, right? That's the main thing. So
we're super happy to
for people to use.
We're happy to have you back on the show. Yeah. Definitely. And Adam, where can people find more of your brilliant lawyering?
Sure. So I write an ongoing column. Not ongoing anymore. I used to write an ongoing column for Escapist magazine, which has a bunch of my work and my thoughts, and actually has the column and article that inspired the Super Babies case on escapistmagazine.com. I can give you the link to put in the notes over there.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I also have legal presentations that I do from time to time, exploring questions kind of like this one about the intersection of law with movies and video games and comic books. So I can give you a link to some of that too.
Yeah, that'd be excellent. I will include that in the show notes. Listeners, you can go grab that in the description below. And thank you both for being on the show this week. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this week on the Major Spoilers Podcast. Listen, I found a lot of value in this conversation with Dr. Peter Coogan and Adam Adler in explaining this story in maybe greater detail than a lot of other news outlets are doing. And if you found some value in this show, you can thank us by heading over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/majorspoilers, where a small monthly contribution can keep this show going far into the future and bring back Peter Coogan and maybe bring back Mr. Adler in a variety of different formats as we have other topics to discuss far into the future. Why? Because we know that you love superhero comics, and we do too. We will talk with you soon.
This podcast is copyright 2024 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.